Okay, today let's talk about monopolistic competition. So what's the idea here? Well, the idea is, let's recall what we have learned, right? So we basically talk about perfect competition and monopoly. What is the basic assumption of perfect competition? Well, we have many firms, we have many sellers. And then the basic assumption of monopoly is in the market, there's only one seller. So what you can see here is, if you think about the scale of this thing, you can see that for monopoly, you're really looking at a very extreme case, right? Because you have only one seller. And then for perfect competition, you're looking at the other side of the extreme case. That is, you have many sellers. Right? So basically you can see that we should think about some middle case. Right? So the middle case between monopoly and competition. Right? So that's our motivation here. So we're looking for the case or the type of market which is in between monopoly and competition. And then this middle case is called imperfect competition. So basically, imperfect competition means that, well, obviously, the competition is not perfect, but still, there is some sort of competition, right? Because you can see that for monopoly, essentially, there is zero competition. And for perfect competition, the competition is perfect. So between zero and perfect, we get imperfect. There are two kinds of market structure, which are about this perfect. There are two kinds of market structures about this imperfect competition. So the first one is called oligopoly. Right? So we have two types of markets. The first is called oligopoly. And then the second is called monopolistic competition. Oligopoly refers to a market with only several sellers. And then monopolistic competition is actually pretty interesting. You can see this from the name, right? So it has both the monopolistic feature, and then it has the perfect competition features. And to be more specific, to define monopolistic competition, we consider a market with a lot of firms, but they're selling similar products, and these products are not identical here. So you can see that we have many firms. Then this is similar to perfect competition, right? But then about products, they are similar, yet not identical. So this is different from the perfect competitive market, because one assumption for perfect competition is products are exactly the same. Right? So in the end, you can see that monopolistically competitive industries, they will be monopolistic in some ways and competitive in others. That is, they will be similar to monopoly in some aspects, but they will be similar to the competitive market in some other aspects. Okay, now let's formally discuss the monopolistic competitive market. So this market has three attributes. The first is there are many sellers. The second is product differentiation. Basically, it means firms, they will produce similar products, but these products, they're still different. And then we also have this long-term free run. We also have this long-term free entry and exit. So basically, you can see that if you look at these three attributes, the first attribute is about competitive market. And then the third attribute, it is still the same as the competitive market. And then the product differentiation is actually not competitive market. And in fact, with product differentiation, these firms will actually have some market power, right? Because its product has some kind of uniqueness. So this will give the firm some kind of monopolistic power. So this implies rather than being a price taker, this or the firms in the monopolistically competitive market will actually have some sort of power to make its own price. So this implies a monopolistically competitive firm in some sense is actually a price maker, right? So product differentiation will actually make firms in this market look like monopolists, right? Okay. Now let's look at a very simple example. Let's consider the ice cream market. First, we consider this market as a monopolistically competitive market. The reason is we have many sellers, right? You can see that there are many ice cream sellers. And then you can see that we have product differentiation. I mean, ice cream sellers, they are selling ice creams. However, ice creams could have a lot of different flavors, right? You could have chocolate, vanilla, green tea, pistachio, or strawberry. And then this market also features free entry and exit. So it's not super hard to start selling your ice cream. That is, it's not super hard to make a entry into this market. And you can also imagine that it's not super hard for you to exit this market. So based on these three features, we say ice cream market is most likely a monopolistically competitive market. Okay, maybe it's better for us to first summarize these different types of markets. You can see that there are two defining features to categorize these different types. The most important feature is about the number of firms, right? So if you have only one firm, then this is definitely a monopoly. And if you have just several firms, then this is a oligopoly. And we will talk about this in chapter 17. And if you have many firms, then depending on product differentiation, if there is very little product differentiation, then we have perfect competition. If there is some degree of product differentiation, then we are having this monopolistic competition, which is just this chapter. And you can see that we also can think about some examples, right? For monopoly, tap water, right? So I think this is the case in Winnipeg, right? The government supplies tap water, right? So it's a centralized single utility firm. And cable TV, maybe in some rural country, right? There's only one cable TV provider. Then in this case, it's a monopolistic market. And then monopolistic competition, right? Novels. So you can see that again, we have some sort of product differentiation. And then movies, again, similar to novels, right? We have different types of movies with different actors. So obviously, different movies are definitely different. So we have product differentiation. And then for agricultural product, they can roughly be considered as identical products because really for wheat, for milk, you really cannot spot major differences. Okay, so to understand this monopolistically competitive market, we have several tasks. The first is we will think about the design facing a individual firm. So essentially, we will think about this firm's profit maximization design. What is the quantity it wants to produce, and what is the price it wants to charge? And then we will think about in the long run, right? We know that one assumption about the monopolistically competitive market is there is free entry and exit in the long run. So we want to understand in the long run, if firm can enter and exit the market, what is the firm's long run profit? Third, we want to examine the equilibrium under monopolistic competition, and we want to compare it with the equilibrium under perfect competition. And finally, we will think about in terms of social welfare. So we will basically think whether the outcome in a monopolistically competitive market is efficient. Okay, so first let's think about a monopolistically competitive firm's profit maximization behavior. Clearly, as I said, when you're talking about profit maximization, the basic condition is always the same. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. This holds for any firm in any type of market structure. So basically now we will actually follow similar steps we have laid out in the Monopolist chapter. So first we will think about the firm, right? The firm will determine its quantity when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And then we will use the firm's demand curve to find out the price. So you can see that here, to examine this firm's profit maximization behavior, we will exactly use the procedure we have adopted in the in the Monopoly chapter. So first, you will look at the intersection between the marginal revenue and the marginal cost. So this gives you this intersection here. And then you will go downward. This gives you the profit maximizing quantity. And then you go upward, and from the demand curve, you can find out the price you should charge. So in these two pictures, right, we can also see the firm's profit. Remember, firm's profit equals price minus average total cost times quantity. So you can see that on this left-hand side, the difference between price and average total cost curve is given by this, right? And then quantity is given by this. So profit is given by this rectangle. And then similarly, the profit on this right-hand side picture would be the same. That is this triangle. Of course, we have two different cases because for the picture on the left, price is larger than average total cost. So this firm is making positive profit. And for the picture on the right, we can see that the average total cost is actually larger than the price. So in this case, the firm is suffering from a loss. Right? But you can see that the process of thinking about profit maximization for a monopolistic firm is exactly the same as the process we used in the monopoly market. So in this sense, you can see that, at least from the perspective of profit maximization, we can see that monopolistically competitive market is the same as the monopoly market. Okay, next, let's think about this second question. That is, a monopolistically competitive firm's profit in the long run, right? Again, recall the assumptions. The third assumption says there is free entry and exit. So this will instantly give you the idea that in the long run, a monopolistically competitive firm will earn a profit of zero, right? The argument is essentially quite similar to the argument we have made in the chapter of competitive market. Right? So basically, think about this. If a firm is making profit, that is, oh boy. So if a firm is making some profit, right, in this case, you can see that other firms will want to enter into this market. And this firm will provide a similar product. This product has some uniqueness, but it will still be similar. So this will push down this firm's profit. And in the end, firms will just make zero profit. And you could also imagine the other case, right? So if the firm is suffering from a loss, and in the long run, then this firm will just exit the market. And this process will continue until firms can at least break even, right? So the argument is actually pretty easy to make. Okay. Now, if we combine the profit maximization and the zero profit condition in the long run, we will get a picture like this, right? So you can see that it basically has two features. First, we have this intersection here, right? So this is from profit maximization. And then we have this price, which is exactly the same as the average total cost. This is because in the long run, profit has to be zero, right? Now, how do you draw out this picture here? Well, you should always start with the demand curve. Similar to the process we had when we were talking about the monopoly market. And then you will get the marginal revenue curve. And then you will just look at a marginal cost curve. So this will give you quantity and price. And then you will make sure the ATC curve just touches this curve. Just touches this point. Right? So that's how you draw this nice picture here. Okay, let's get more discussion on this long-run equilibrium. So the long-run equilibrium has major two features. First, price larger than marginal cost. Right? This is very similar to a monopoly market. Right? And price equals to average total cost. This is similar to a competitive market. So you can see that this long run curve, right? This picture about the long run equilibrium is really a combination of both the monopoly market and the competitive market, right? To be more specific, right? So this point is about monopoly. And this point is about competitive market. Okay. Now, let's think about efficiency. To understand efficiency, we first think about the firm's production decision and its pricing decision. First, in terms of production, a monopolistically competitive firm has access capacity. So access capacity is defined as the difference between the efficient scale and the firm's output. So let's look at this. What you can see here is, first, this point gives us the firm's output. And then this is the efficient scale. Remember, what is the efficient scale? It is the output at which the average total cost is minimized. So here you can see that the firm's output is smaller than the efficient scale. So this basically means that even the firm has the production capacity, the firm is not minimizing its average total cost. So this basically implies that there is some production capacity unutilized, right? So there is this excess capacity. And then the second is about markup. This is about the firm's pricing decision. Markup essentially refers to the difference between the firm's price and its marginal cost. So what you can see here is, because the firm's profit maximization behavior is the same as a monopolist, so we know that we will always have price larger than marginal cost. So let's recall why this is the case. So we learned from the last chapter, right? For a monopolist, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. But we also know that marginal revenue curve has to be below the demand curve. This implies price larger than marginal revenue. So this gives us price larger than marginal cost, right? So this basically means for a monopolistically competitive firm, it always charges some markup. Clearly, this is very different from a competitive firm in the long run, right? We know that in the long run, a competitive firm will produce at the efficient scale. So there is no efficiency loss, there is no excess capacity. The competitive firm is using its production capacity in the most efficient way. And then we also know that in the long run, for a competitive firm, price equals marginal revenue, right? How do you see this? Well, because marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And we know that for a perfectly competitive firm, price equals marginal revenue. So in the end, price equals marginal cost. So this implies there is no markup. And you will see that this is very important in determining the efficiency of the outcome. Okay, now let's summarize the long-run equilibrium. So first, for perfect competition, right? So let's first start with the very basic case. That is, for any type of firm, you always have marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And then if we have perfect competition, then we know that price always equals this. So price equals marginal revenue equals marginal cost will always hold, no matter whether we are thinking about a long-run equilibrium or short-run equilibrium. And then we also know that in the long run, price equals average total cost. So in the long run, this result will also hold. However, I have to emphasize this result does not hold in the short run because P equals ATC may not hold in the short run. Okay, let's think about the monopoly. So again, we start with the basic case. So price equals marginal cost. And then we know that for a monopolist, its price always larger than marginal revenue. So this will hold in both long run or short run. In fact, in the monopoly market, we don't really differentiate between long run and short run because we assume there is no entry and exit. Sorry, because we assume there is no entry. Now what about monopolistic competition? Well, this will definitely hold, right? Because we learned that this result comes from the firm's profit maximization behavior. And we know that a monopolistically competitive firm has the same kind of profit maximization behavior as a monopolist. So this result will still hold. And then we learned in the long run, the monopolistic competitive firm will be the same, will have the same profit as the perfect competitive firm, that is 0. This implies P equals ATC. So we can have this here. So that's how you get all these 3 results. And I would say it's important for you to understand these 3 results because I think they really summarize we have learned about perfect competition, monopoly, and monopolistic competition. So spend some time to play with these equalities and inequalities to try to understand why do you have these equalities and why do you have these inequalities. Okay, finally, we could formally, officially talk about the welfare implication. Right? So we want to understand is the outcome, right, in a monopolistic competitive market maximizing the welfare of society. So we're trying to think about whether it is efficient. Okay. A quite easy to see result is you can see that monopolistic competition is not efficient, right? Because we talk about this. Whenever price is larger than marginal cost, to be more accurate, whenever price is not equal to marginal cost, then the market is inefficient. So for a monopolistically competitive firm, you can see that the argument about the inefficiency is the same as the argument we have made in the monopoly market. So the argument goes like this. If you let me find a larger picture. It's still quite small. Okay, I'll just use this one. So, oh boy. So here, you can see that the price is given by this. And then the marginal cost is given by this blue dot. And our focus would be these quantities, these Q's. And you can see that for these quantities, right, these sellers, the marginal cost is lower compared with these buyers' willingness to pay. So this again implies that if they can trade with each other, there would be some positive benefit. However, because of this monopolistic competitive market, there's no trade happening between them. So this is a deadweight loss. So that's why there is inefficiency. Oh, by the way, you can see if you are asked to measure the deadweight loss, you can see that it is essentially given by this triangle here, right? Okay. Now, so how can we regulate this? Again, this is a similar topic to the regulation on monopoly market, right? So maybe the government can set price equals marginal cost, because we discussed price equals marginal cost gives you the efficient result. It maximizes the total surplus. But you can see that this is quite unrealistic. The reason is because we are talking about a market with many sellers. Remember, the first assumption of this monopolistic competitive market is we have many sellers. So this essentially means the government agency has to regulate many firms who produce different products. You can see that this is a very daunting task. And then, second, in the long run, this regulation is unrealistic. The reason is because in the long run, firm is already making zero profit. So asking firm to reduce the price to marginal cost will essentially make these firms suffer losses. And in the long run, these firms will just choose to exit. So consumers will be in a position with no products to purchase. Right? So this will actually hurt consumers in the long run. And you can see this from the picture here. So if we look at this long run equilibrium, you can see that price is at this level, right? And then government says, well, in order to get the efficient level of production, we should make sure price equals marginal cost, which implies now we're looking at this price, right? But you can see that this price is below this average total cost, right? So this implies that the firm will earn a negative profit if the government forces the market price to be the same as the marginal cost. Right? So this is a unrealistic regulation. Okay. Now, the second type of inefficiency is actually quite subtle, and it's also interesting. So here we think about the optimal number of firms in the market. That is, what is the best or what is the optimal number of firms which would maximize our total surplus, right? The result is the number of the firms in the market might be too much. The number of firms in the market might be too large or too small because of too much or too little entry. So if there is too much entry, then the number of firms in the market is inefficiently large. If there is too little entry, then the number of firms in the market is inefficiently small. Why do we have this result? Well, because there are two kinds of competing externalities in this market. The first one is called product variety externality. So it basically means that if there is new entry into the market, then consumers will have more choices. So this is good for consumers. This implies entry has positive externality. And we learned in the previous chapters, when there is positive externality, then the production or the number will generally be too small, right? Recall in the education case. Education has positive externality. And then the private or the market outcome is actually too little compared with the optimal outcome. Right? So here it means if we only consider the fact that entry has positive externality, then the entry will be too little. Then there is this competing externality, which is called business stealing externality. So it basically means that if a firm enters into the market, it will put pressures on its competitors. So other firms will actually suffer. So this implies that new entry has negative externalities on existing firms. So this implies that there will be too much entry, right? Remember in the previous chapter when we talked about the pollution case, there is negative externality from the aluminum factory, which pollutes the air, right? And in that case, we learned the market outcome is producing an inefficiently high level of output, right? So here it means the entry will be too much. So you can see that depending on which effect is larger, entry might be too much or too little, right? So you can see that for this case, it's actually hard to say whether in the end the entry is too much or too little, unless we can precisely measure the effect from these two different externalities. Okay, let's look at this quick quiz here. So list the 3 key attributes of monopolistic competition. So essentially these are about the 3 assumptions, right? So we have many sellers. And then we have product differentiation. So essentially this means they're selling similar products. So these sellers are not monopolists. However, there exists some kind of product differentiation between different sellers' products. So still, these sellers will have some sort of market power. And third, we have free exit and entry. And it's also important for you to understand that these 1 and 3, they're related to perfect competition. And then for the second attribute, it is related to the monopoly market. Draw and explain a diagram to show that long-run equilibrium in a monopolistically competitive market. So we have done this before. Basically, you would start from the demand curve, and then marginal revenue curve, and then marginal cost curve. So this will gives you price. And then you will draw a average total cost curve which just touches this point. So this is the ATC curve, MC curve, MR curve. This is the demand curve. How does this equilibrium differ from that in a perfectly competitive market? I should not erase this. So there are 2 main differences, right? So the first, So the first difference is we have a price which is larger than the marginal cost, right? So this is the marginal cost. And this is the positive markup, which will generate inefficiency. And second, we know that there is excess capacity. That is, here we are having this efficient scale. And we know that the quantity which maximizes this firm's profit is smaller than this efficient output level. So there is excess capacity. Okay. Now let's, okay, so this is a very nice table which summarizes the three different types of market structures we learned. Let's go through this table. So first, you can see that we have three different types of markets, right? Perfect competition, monopolistic competition, and monopoly. First, goal of firms. So a firm's goal is always about maximizing profit, right? At least in the introductory course, we want to make such assumption. And then the rule for maximizing its profit is always about marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Again, why this is the case? Well, because think about this, right? Let's say this is marginal cost. This is marginal revenue. Essentially, you can see that if you have a quantity, right? If your quantity is here, you can see that marginal revenue is larger than marginal cost. It basically means that you should continue to increase your production because the benefit from the additional unit of production is larger than the cost from the additional unit of output. And then the opposite case, if marginal cost is larger than marginal revenue, it means you should decrease, right? You should decrease your output because the additional cost from one additional unit is larger than the additional revenue you can get from one additional output, right? So in the end, you can see that the best quantity, the quantity which maximizes your profit, happens at the intersection of marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Can earn economic profits in the long run. So in all three cases, the answer is yes, because in the long run, firms don't need to worry about exit and entry. So it's possible they can earn positive economic profits in the short run. Okay, next. Whether a firm is a price taker. Well, you can see that this only holds imperfect competition, right? Because we have many firms and they're selling the exact same product. So they have zero market power. So they take the price as given. And then in the monopolistic competition, even we have many sellers, the answer is still no. The reason is because of product differentiation. Because each product is actually unique. Even products, they are similar. This will give this firm some sort of market power. Right? So in this sense, a firm in the monopolistically competitive market is still a price taker. And then for a monopolist, of course, it is not a price taker. It is a price maker. Okay, next, price. So what is the relationship between price and marginal cost? Well, of course, we learned about this, right? So for perfect competition, price equals marginal cost, and for both of the other two types of markets, we have price larger than marginal cost. And we also know that if price equals marginal cost, then the market will be efficient. If price is larger than marginal cost, then the price will not be efficient. Okay. Produce welfare maximizing level of output. Well, we just talked about this, right? So because P equals MC, now we could say yes. And because P larger than MC, we would say no. Okay. number of firms. So this is really about the assumption of these markets. So we have many in the perfect competition and many firms in the monopolistic competition and just one firm in the monopoly market. Entry in the long run, yes, we assume both perfect competition and the monopolistic competition have free entry in the long run. Right? And this is no. And you can see that because there is free entry in the long run, so in the long run there is zero economic profit for perfect competition and zero economic profit for monopolistic competition. And there is positive economic profit, or there may have, or potentially there is positive economic profit for a monopolist in the long run. Okay, great. Now let's look at the true-false problem. Oops. Okay. Okay. So when a firm is in a monopolistically competitive market and it earns zero economic profit, then its product price must equal marginal cost. You can see that this is incorrect because we know that if there is zero economic profit, this implies price equals average total cost, right? So it's not related to this, right? Well, and you can see that. Okay, let me talk about this in more details. So we know that this is a monopolistically competitive firm, which implies that its price will be larger than marginal revenue, right? So in this sense, you can see that if price larger than marginal revenue and marginal equals if marginal revenue equals marginal cost, then this tells us price larger than marginal cost, right? So obviously this is incorrect because it says price equal marginal cost. Okay, now if I remove one word, let's say I remove this word. Now, should we choose true or false? Well, in this case, let's see. In this case, we will have a competitive firm, right? So if we have a competitive firm, then we know that price has to be equal to marginal cost, right? So you can see that if it's a competitive firm, then we should choose true here. So to summarize, right? Now we're having a monopolistically competitive firm, so we should choose false. But if it's a competitive market, then we should choose true. Okay, second, when a firm operates at efficient scale, it is producing at the minimum point on its average total cost curve. I think we have actually seen this same true-false problem in the previous chapters. It's so the answer here, yeah, this is the true statement, and we learned if you have an ATC curve like this, and then the quantity which minimizes ATC is the efficient scale. Product differentiation generally leads to some measure of market power. Well, I said this for several times, so this is true. For a profit maximizing firm in a monopolistically competitive market, when price is equal to average total cost, price must lie above marginal cost. So now we have P equals ATC. And then the result is price must lie above marginal cost. Well, this is correct. However, you can see one thing. You do not need this condition here. Because if it's a monopolistically competitive firm, then price is always larger than marginal cost. Right? A profit maximizing firm in a monopolistically competitive market generally prices its product and some markup over marginal cost. So according to this result here, we know that this is true. Again, markup essentially means price minus marginal cost. So if this is larger than 0, then this implies there exists markup. Okay, monopolistic competition is the only market structure that features many sellers. Well, this one is simple, right? Because we know that this is definitely not correct. We know that when we first discussed the perfect competitive market, we know that the perfect competitive market also have many sellers. Excess capacity characterizes firms in monopolistically competitive market, even in situations of long-run equilibrium. So here you can see that it says in the long run, these firms will have excess capacity. Well, this is correct, right? I don't think this is related to long run or short run because we know that essentially price is larger than. Oh, sorry. I think this is actually related to long run. So price is larger than marginal cost. And then we know that in the long run, price equals average total cost. So this essentially means ATC is larger than marginal cost. And then if we look at this from the curve, right, it means you have to produce at the you have to produce at the left side of this efficient scale because that's when you can have ATC larger than marginal cost. So yeah, in the end, this is related to long run equilibrium, and this statement here is correct. Okay, now let's talk about the next chapter, which is chapter 17 about oligopoly. Now, what is the definition of oligopoly? Well, it's actually very simple, right? So it's just a market with several sellers. So you can see that is this is a very straightforward definition. Now, so why this type of market is actually very interesting? Well, the reason is you have a few sellers, right? So this major feature will actually generate interesting results. So think about this. If you have two sellers, then essentially it means the action of one seller will actually affect the profits of the other seller, right? And then this one seller's product and this one seller's production decision will also be affected by the other seller. So you can see that there is this interaction. There is this interdependence between these two firms. And this interaction, this interdependence will actually shape firms' pricing and production decisions. Again, the idea is just think about a very simple example, right? Just think about two firms. A firm's production will affect B firm's production. And A firm's production will be affected by B firm's production. Right? So this interaction will affect how firms optimally determine its price and quantity. Okay. So the major tension in oligopoly market is cooperation and self-interest. Again, think about the two-firm case, right? So if you have two firms, A and B, in the market, so what's the best way for these two firms to earn the highest profit? Well, A and B should cooperate to act like a monopolist. The reason is, in a market, a monopolist earns the highest possible profit. So A and B should cooperate and act like a monopolist in determining its production and price. However, you'll see later that even A and B understand this. Both A and B will actually have a tendency to deviate, to betray each other. This is because their self-interest in maximizing its own profit. Okay, so now let's think about a simple case. Again, just two firms. And when you're thinking about oligopoly with only two firms, this is called a duopoly. And you can see that the name does make sense, right? So you have DUO here. Right? This basically means two. Okay, so let's see the example here. So we have a town with only two water sellers, Jack and Jill. And they decide how much water to sell on each Saturday. And suppose we have very simple case. Marginal cost is 0. Fixed cost is 0. So total cost is 0. This implies profit equals revenue. Right? So let's examine the demand curve. You can see that at each price, right, we have the quantity. And then we can calculate the total revenue, which is trivial now because, again, price times quantity gives you revenue. Now, our task is we want to think about Jack and Jill's pricing and production under different market structures. We will first think about competitive market. Then we will think about the monopolist market. Then we will think about the oligopoly market with cooperation and without cooperation. So first, let's think about competitive market. So let's assume this is a competitive market. Right? Right? So here, we want to think about what is the price and the quantity. Well, remember, very importantly, for a competitive market, price equals marginal cost. Right? And we know that we have assumed marginal cost equals 0. So price is just 0. And now what is the quantity? Well, we definitely can find out the quantity from the demand curve. Right? So price is 0. Then quantity has to be 120. So quantity is 120. And we also know that this quantity has to be efficient. This quantity has to be maximizing the market's total surplus. This implies if a quantity is smaller than 120, then we know that this quantity is inefficient, right? So let's think about monopoly, right? So in this case, right, we are thinking about monopoly here. So even if we have two sellers, then we could still think about them as a sort of combination, right? Maybe they act together as one seller. In this case, we can consider it can be a monopoly market, right? So if they cooperate, they act like a monopoly. In this case, what is the price and quantity? Well, Okay, first I'll tell you how to see this. So if you're the monopolist in the market, your purpose is surely maximize your profit, right? So generally when we are talking about maximizing profit, we will actually try to look for the quantity which satisfies marginal revenue equals marginal cost. But now we will not do that. We will use a simpler way. What we're doing here is we will just look at this firm's profit at different quantities. So you can see that the quantity of 60 gives you the largest profit, right? So this is actually pretty simple. It tells us the quantity which maximizes the monopolist's profit should be 60. And the price, we can read it from the demand curve, which is 60. Okay, now this is I wouldn't say it's an important type of knowledge, but it's an important trick. Now, why shouldn't you use MR equals MC? Okay, so why not? Let's see what will happen if you think about marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Now we have total revenue here, right? So we can write marginal revenue here. And this is 0. And in this case, you can see that it should be 110, right? So this is 900. So this should be, no, it's not 900. It's 90. This should be 70, 50, 30, 10, minus 10, minus 30, minus 50, minus 70, minus 90, minus 110, right? Now, what's the problem if you want to use MR equals MC to figure out the profit maximizing quantity? You have no answer here, right? Because marginal cost is 0, but you don't have a 0 in the marginal revenue, and you definitely shouldn't use this, right? So why do we have this result? Well, the reason is because this is an introductory course. We only have these integers here, right? So potentially, the marginal revenue will happen at a certain non-integer number. Maybe it happens at 5.9 at a price of, I'll just put down a random number here. Let's say 45.4. And then maybe here we can have a marginal revenue of 0, right? So if you want to exactly use marginal revenue equals marginal cost to figure out the correct answer, you have to get the whole picture, right? But now we're only dealing with these integer numbers, so we don't have the whole picture here, right? So the answer here is, if you have a problem, the lesson here is, if you have a problem similar to this, which you can directly calculate profit, then just directly calculate profit and find out at which quantity you have the largest profit. If you don't have a table like this, then yes, that's when you should think about MR equals MC, right? So that's just like a little trick to solve the problem. Okay, so let me remove these redundant marks. What you can see here is monopoly market is definitely inefficient, right? Because the quantity is just half of the quantity under the competitive market. And the price is also much higher compared with 0 price under competitive market. Now let's think about the third case. So now we want to think about the oligopoly case with cooperation. So oligopoly. Oops. So oligopoly with cooperation. Now, how should Jack and Jill cooperate to maximize their profit? Again, they should join force and act like a monopolist. So in this case, you can see that again, the market quantity will be 60 and price will be 60. So we can assume Jack and Jill, they have the same factory. They have the same production capacity. So in this case, we can assume Jack and Jill, they will each produce 30. Right? So they will each produce 30 liters. Right? Now, let's think about the fourth case. So oligopoly without cooperation. Now think about this. If, let's say now Jack and Jill are actually producing 30 liters, will Jack or Jill want to deviate? Will Jack and Jill have the incentive to break their contract, right? Well, this is actually easy to see. Now let's just, for example, let's ask whether will Jill wanted to deviate? That is, will Jill wanted to deviate from producing 30 liters? Right? Right? Let's examine whether Jill want to go from 30 to 40. So, now to answer this, we have to first think their profit. That is Jack and Jill's profit. So let's think about what is the monopolist profit. Well, this is simple, right? So it's 3600. Right? So this is the profit. And now in the case of oligopoly with cooperation, we can see that the profit of Jack and the profit of Jill would be 1,800. That is the basically get half of the profit as a monopolist. So now let's say Jill tries to produce 40 and Jack still produce 30. What is the market price? Well, price has to be, so we can read from the demand curve, right? Has to be 3500. Okay. This is not price. So price has to be 50, right? Now, what is Jack's profit? Well, Jack's profit is 50 times 30, so it's 1500. What is Jill's profit? Oh, note that I'm using pi to refer to profit. So Jill's profit is 40 times 50, so it's 2000. Okay, great. Now let's compare numbers. If Jack and Jill, they cooperate, Jill can earn 1,800. But if Jill decides to break up the contract and deviate to produce 40, then her profit would be 2,000. It is larger, right? So this implies that Jill will want to break up this cooperation and produce 40 liters, right? And then you could also definitely think about Jack, right? So we can assume if Geo stays at 30 liters, will Jack want to produce 40? Then you will see that Jack will also want to produce 40, right? But there is the other case. We also can ask if Jack stays at, okay, let's say Jack still stays at 30, will Geo want to reduce from 30 to 20? Now let's see this case. So if Geo decides to produce 20, so the total output would be 50, and then the price would be 70. And in this case, Jack's profit would be 2100, and Geo's profit would be only 1400. So if you compare these numbers, you can see that Geo will not want to reduce her output level, right? So the result here is both Jack and Geo will want to deviate from producing 30 liters to 40 liters, right? Or you could say both Jack and Geo will want to cheat, will want to break up their cooperation and produce more, right? So that's the result here. So essentially we discussed two cases for this oligopoly. The first is with collusion, right? You can imagine that this case is with collusion, and the fourth case is with the third case is with collusion, and this case is without collusion. And collusion essentially means there is a agreement among different firms about how many quantities to produce or what kind of prices they want to charge. And based on this, we can define cartel, right? Cartel means a group of firms, they act in collusion to determine their optimal price and quantity. Okay. Okay, I guess I'll just stop here, and we still have some other topics about this Jack and Jill example. We will talk about this in the next lecture.